What's good, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome to the channel if you are new. As you see today, we are reacting to the insect tier list by, what is it, Tierzoo? Yes, by Tierzoo. They do these videos every few months, or I don't know how frequently they do it, but they rank animals according to like big cats, dogs, etc., and rank them on a tier list, obviously, to see which one's, you know, the best, the most OP, the sorriest, the weakest, etc. So we're gonna check this out. Let me know down below what insect you think is the strongest. Me personally, it's gonna be between as you see here, the ant, or like they had in the thumbnail, a praying mantis. But I don't really mess with insects like that, so I don't really know. But make sure you guys like, share, subscribe to the channel. Follow me on Twitch, that'll be linked down below, and follow me on TikTok and IG, that'll be right here, so you can do all that good stuff. And without any further ado, let's get into the video. I'm gonna try not to pause this as much either, because it's a pretty long video. Not Overwatch. See what I mean? Like the ant, bro.
Insects
Also,
are one of the most
haven't eaten
broken
breakfast
factions
yet,
the game
so
has ever seen. Nowhere else in nature will you find such
can't
an
even see
incredible
it.
concentration of abilities
So let me
that
know.
are
It's
not
a
only
pancake.
overpowered, but also extremely
Yikes.
unique. It's tough to even know where to start when talking about what makes insects such a successful group.
No,
Because in a lot
no,
of
no
cases,
cap. I
it's
thought that
not
was like a
just that their
drawing.
individual abilities are overpowered, but some of them feel like they should be mutually exclusive, since they're just insanely OP when used in combination with one another. You'll see what I mean once I get into the tier list, but first, a brief overview of the insect faction's general attributes and history.
If I'm gonna weigh stuff out,
Insects were added to the game during the early Carboniferous expansion. The devs bumped up the atmospheric oxygen level, which allowed members of the Arthropod faction to adopt larger sizes and more costly abilities.
Hold
And
on.
while most of the Arthropod player base was trying to dominate the land by leveling up their size, a small
Let me ask for anybody that's like maybe an expert out there or whatever. Bugs were really that big back then? Cause I'm happy as hell. They're not that big no more.
offshoot
That's
of the
disgusting.
crustacean player base opted to forego the gigantism trait and instead used this oxygen
That's
bonus
nasty.
to unlock an ability never before seen in game: flight. Because these new creatures were the very first to gain the ability to fly, the air became entirely their domain for the time being, and would remain that way until reptiles unlocked the ability several expansions
Evolution
later.
is crazy.
Insects are extremely diverse in their abilities and stat spreads. In fact, they're so diverse that it's impossible to include them all in a single video. I'll be keeping things fairly generalized, but truth be told, many of the groups I'll be discussing today have so many standout members that they could easily be an entire tier list in and of themselves. So it's a little tough to pin down their general attributes, but there are a few commonalities. Being members of the Arthropod faction, all insects are granted the exoskeletal armor
grasshopper.
perk, which
Damn.
greatly raises their AC compared to soft-bodied builds of similar sizes, with the only downside being a massive reduction in those same
Why am I
defensive
eating
stats
during this?
for a short time every time the player levels up. This makes insects quite
This is
tanky
disgusting.
on average, allowing them to excel in combat. The insect build also has access to the Compound Eyes perk, which grants them vastly improved awareness compared to other arthropods like scorpions and centipedes. With 360-degree vision, their ability to avoid obstacles, dodge attacks, and pursue targets while flying is far superior to most other flyers. This enhanced perception perk is important because insects tend to have naturally high stealth, so in order to compete with other insect builds, acute vision is required. We've only just scratched the surface of the insane abilities insects have access to, though. For a more in-depth look, let's get into the tier
ABCD.
list.
That's tier list.
At the
Silverfish.
bottom of the tier list, we have the silverfish.
Yeah, those better
The
at the bottom.
silverfish
I
is the
kill
most
those shits.
primitive insect build still in
these?
existence. It kind of blurs the line between what is and is not considered an insect, and not in a good way. Unlike other flightless insects, which decided to respec and drop the flight ability in favor of
body
more
those.
refined strategies, the silverfish build actually never had access to it in the first place. Aside from having an exoskeleton, they don't really have any of the abilities that make insects powerful. They do not have wings and have essentially no combat abilities. They have fairly
what is
low
that?
defenses and get bodied left and right by pretty much everything, with their only useful stat being their decently high movement speed. Their special ability allows
might have
them
to
to
look
gain
on my
XP
monitor up
from
here, so-
eating cellulose and lignin, meaning they can farm
I'm looking
XP
up the
from
whole time
wooden
as well.
structures, which normally don't grant any experience. This ability would be fairly
Hey, you
powerful
would?
in forest biomes, but because they're such weak combatants, they tend to actually stick to urban areas, feeding on things like paper and cloth, in the relative safety of houses, apartments, and office spaces. Even there, they aren't completely safe though. And while no build is ever truly safe in the insect meta, the silverfish's extreme lack of useful abilities places it firmly in F tier. That's honestly the only insect build I believe deserves an F tier ranking. Most insects are quite viable, and even the less viable ones tend to have at least a few useful things going for them, even if those things aren't necessarily broken. First,
walking
in D tier,
stick.
we have the Phasmid build, which includes walking sticks and leaf mimics. These builds sport what are unquestionably some of the most impressive camouflage abilities in the entire
This is
game,
Luigi Mansion, right?
second only to color-changing builds like the Octopus and Chameleon. As impressive as these are, though, the question I constantly end up asking is this really necessary? Because with the exception of insects which deliberately lower their stealth as part of the aposematic coloration strategy, insects as a whole already have an above-average stealth,
Wasp be attacking
and are
birds.
usually able to maintain this while still speccing into other equally impressive abilities. Their camouflage can only take them so far. While they're near undetectable while remaining motionless, walking sticks still need to move to find food. And while they do mimic the movement of a swaying leaf or branch, this certainly isn't perfect.
Imagine how many of these walking sticks you like walk by a day, or like just pass by in a day and don't even realize it's an insect. It's kind of wild.
In fact, if they're ever caught in an environment where camouflage doesn't match as well, their instincts to sway and
Hear that? Hey.
Some Phasmids do
Okay.
possess chemical defenses, but as we'll see further up the tier list, this attack is quite mild compared to the heat some other insects are packing. Phasmids have a similar game plan to sloths, complete with all the major flaws this strategy is riddled with. Although at least Phasmids don't completely forego all common sense and make a dangerous trek to the forest floor once a week just to poop. Next in D tier, we have the Lepidopterans, the faction which includes moths, butterflies, and skippers. At first glance, these may seem like absolute bottom tier builds. They're among the most vulnerable builds in the game when it comes to combat, with extremely squishy defensive stats and utterly offensive abilities. Many of the larval forms of these builds are 100% defenseless and have a mobility stat in the single digits, literally the freest kills in the game. However, the Lepid player base is quite crafty and has come up with a few ways of at least sort of mitigating their many weaknesses.
They use their wings, right?
Caterpillars and adult lepids alike can adopt quite convincing disguises, some designed to help them blend in, and some designed to intimidate. Granted, these strategies often don't hold up against high intelligence.
Hold on.
Quite
That wasn't a snake,
disguises,
my nigga?
Some designed to help them blend in, and some designed to
When have you ever seen a caterpillar that looks like this?
intimidate. Granted, these strategies often don't hold up against high intelligence builds, but it does help. Some caterpillars spec into quite potent defenses, like spines and toxins, which make them simply not worth the potential damage to take on. And credit where credit is due, even though they still are fairly defenseless, butterflies and moths do have excellent mobility, and can fly much greater distances than most insect builds. This enables them to avoid high conflict areas of the map, and reach higher quality loot that might be too rare for most players to rely on. Their massive wings, in addition to being highly customizable for a variety of stealth or intimidation purposes, also just make them look much larger than insects of comparable body sizes, which helps dissuade attacks. But ultimately, lepids still take plenty of L's, and most high-tier insect builds have quite oppressive matchups against them, so they're definitely a below-average faction. That's actually it for D tier, and I know it might seem like we're moving up the tier list quickly, but again, insects are a massively successful faction, and are going to be concentrated in the higher tiers.
Cockroach, oh brother. Oh brother.
It really helps to whiten your...
At the bottom of C tier, we have the cockroach. The cockroach is the ultimate survivor, which opted to spec into mobility, stealth, and a multitude of tiers.
What the fuck was that?
At the bottom of C tier, we have the cockroach. The cockroach is the ultimate...
Excuse me? What is this?
Survivor, which opted to spec into mobility, stealth, and a multitude of elemental resistances in lieu of any offensive abilities. While they
Man,
don't
that
pack
wasn't
much
no rope.
heat, their flat shape allows them to easily wedge themselves into locations that are extremely difficult for other players to attack them in. They're rather clumsy flyers, but they do have an above-average ground movement speed, enabling them to quickly scurry to cover if they see a predator player approaching. However, when caught out in the open or backed into a corner, they're fairly helpless and easily one of the most vulnerable builds in the entire insect faction. They're also somewhat carried by human mains, making temperate and tundra servers viable for them, because really, as impressive as their toxin and radiation resistance abilities are, they're quite vulnerable to the cold and would still be mostly confined to jungle servers if not for humans unlocking the fire control ability. The biggest variants may be able to tank 1 or 2 hits, but even then, with no way to fight back, they're still pretty screwed if they fail to outright escape a fight. Next in C tier we have a fearsome looking generalist
This better not be missed. Hold on.
build, which
Go back.
to fight back, they're still pretty screwed if they fail to outright escape a fight. Next in C tier we have the Earwig, a fearsome looking generalist build which appears to have a giant pair of mandibles on its rear end, called Circe. As fearsome as these Circe forceps are, if we actually check the Earwig's base stats, we quickly notice that, just like all of its other stats, its power stat is actually quite mediocre.
Damn, they weak as
As
hell.
menacing as the Circe are, the actual piercing damage they can deal is fairly minimal, and can even be deflected by the most basic of armor. And even against builds without armor,
Lord.
damage is so low that larger builds still don't really need to be wary of approaching an Earwig.
So y'all
and
weak
can
as
attack
hell.
without restraint. Still, just because they can doesn't mean they do, as the Earwig's intimidation factor alone is oftentimes enough to protect it from conflict. And credit where credit is due, the forceps are actually fairly decent in matchups against soft-bodied insects, and allow the Earwig to carry their targets much better than they could with their jaws. And while it may seem silly to have opted for rear-facing weapons instead of the more typical forward-facing ones like mandibles and rostrums, the position does actually serve a purpose, in that it allows earwigs far greater access to burrows and tight spaces, where they can hide out and avoid conflict altogether. Of all of the weapons insects have access to, Circe might be some of the most unorthodox, which
So
probably contributes to its ability to intimidate other players. However, I think to get out of
The right player call your bluff.
earwigs need to actually have the ability to back up their
a wrap.
threat display. They would do well to spec into some sort of venom. Venom-infused stings are a fairly common attribute for insects, so this feels like a bit of a missed opportunity. So, while certainly a viable mid-tier, don't overestimate this build's abilities. At the top of C tier, we've got the Orthopterans, including grasshoppers, crickets, and katydids. These are the first mobility-centric builds on our list. While they're quite capable flyers, their true power comes from their saltatorial hind legs rather than
Yeink.
their wings. Flight is an excellent defensive ability, as it allows the user to get out of reach of an attack's range.
Oh, leave that
This
shit alone.
utility is lessened if their ability to get airborne has too much startup lag. And
Yeah.
so instead of using their wings to get themselves up into the air, a powerful jump enables the Orthopteran mains
that?
to escape vertically at instant speed.
Salamander?
Their excellent vision makes it extremely difficult to get within striking range without alerting them. And because their jump has such excellent frame data, landing an ambush strike on an Orthopteran can feel near impossible at times. And even
How'd
if
you
a player
miss,
does
bro? You
manage
were-
to secure a grab, their powerful hind legs can function as quite an effective combo break. The spines on
Them
their
motherfuckers
legs
really
augments the
fight?
damage their kicks can deal, meaning
I
that if
didn't
the
know that.
grasshopper can tank the first few hits of an ambush attack, they may be able to turn the tide of a confrontation and escape after dealing serious damage to the attacker. With that said, I think there
you're
are a
already
few
getting
flaws in
eaten.
their strategy, which I think keeps them out of the upper
Might as
tiers.
well die.
Grasshoppers can jump so far that there's really no way of knowing what sort of situation they're about to put themselves in. In a similar manner to the flying fish, using such a drastic escape option can sometimes end up putting you in a worse position than you were before, especially if your local meta has a lot of spider players. And although they do present a challenge, most predator players aren't disrupted by the grasshopper's kicks, and can either take
Bink.
the damage outright or one-hit the grasshopper before it even has a chance to retaliate.
Yeah.
At the
True
bottom of B
bugs.
tier, we have the Hemipterans, a diverse order of insects with a few things in common, including generally having high defense and being somewhat shield-shaped.
Oh, these shits.
However, the most notable thing is that rather than slicing or pinching mouth parts, the Hemiptera build opts for a piercing rostrum, perfect for puncturing through tough surfaces. For the majority of Hemipteran builds, this allows them to farm XP from sources that are normally hard to access, like the energy-dense sap inside trees and stems, or the starch inside of seeds. However, there are some Hemipterans which use their sharp rostrum to deliver a venomous bite that is able to pierce through armored
Boy, he wants you
targets.
dead, boy.
Their venom is powerful
He
enough
wants
to
you
one-shot
dead.
just about any other insect, and can even deal severe damage to larger builds. The only major shortcoming here is that these so-called assassin bugs tend to actually have fairly low stealth, opting for the aposematic intimidation defense I mentioned earlier. And on top of all that, they have fairly low mobility, making actually ambushing another player kind of difficult if they're actually paying enough attention to simply dodge the attacks and flee. Some do break this trend though, and opt for both better camouflage and high aquatic mobility, making them some of the most fearsome aquatic builds in the game. On the
I hate
herbivore side of
frogs.
things, Hemipterans tend to fare a bit worse. They usually still have fairly low mobility and low stealth, and their defenses may be higher than the average, but are nowhere near as impenetrable as some of the builds higher on this list. They
Fuck.
tend to rely on a chemical defense similar to some phasmids, which is where they get the name stink bugs from. However, similar to phasmids, these defenses also tend to be a bit lacking, and often fail to deter attackers. So certainly a group with some standout members, and fine for XP
Yikes.
farming, but still nothing too broken.
Lace
And
wig.
topping off B tier, we have the Neuroptera,
Lace front.
a rather clumsy build with some pretty pathetic looking base stats. Genuinely
Golly.
one of the least agile flyers in the entire game. However, looking at the final
got shit
form
on
of this
him, though.
build paints a highly misleading picture of its capabilities. The larval form, which is the form they spend the vast majority of their time as, is a brutally effective predator build for any player who prefers the camping playstyle. Taking a look at the larva's stats, we see that they have incredibly high power and stealth for their size. Antlions have a devastating, venomous bite, which they use to one-shot unsuspecting players before draining all of their life points with their hollow jaws. Because of their ability to construct pitfall traps, their passive stealth rating is extremely high, making their ambush playstyle unbelievably effective. As if escape wasn't hard enough, once the prey gets caught in their trap, the antlion even has the ability to launch projectiles to stun its target, making
the
escape
fuck?
a near impossibility. I have an entire video dedicated to the overpowered abilities of Neuropteran larvae, but in short, they are what the earwig pretends to be. If you took the
Yeah.
earwig Circe, put them in front
You
and
don't
made
set
them
the
sharper and
trend.
gave them deadly venom
He's
to
a
boot,
pretender.
you'd have an antlion. So why the weak adult form? Having spent all their evolution points optimizing their larval form, they spend hardly any time at all as adults. They don't even have the ability to eat in this form, and really only exist to be a vessel that allows players to find each other and complete the mating questline, something they lack the ability to do in their much less mobile larval form.
What?
So while I do think it'd be more impressive if they didn't take such a massive cut to their power level
So you grow up to die.
during their final level up, there's no denying
You
that
can't
for
even
the vast
eat,
majority
like-
of their playtime, these builds are an absolute menace to encounter. At the bottom of A tier, we have a personal favorite of mine, the Mantis.
Bink.
Mantises have a fairly straightforward playstyle consisting
Bink.
of slashing and grabbing their targets using powerful spiked raptorial forelimbs. If we take a look at the Mantis' stats, we see that the Mantis has one of the highest base power stats of any non-venomous insect. It also has a stealth stat similar to that of a walking stick, which it desperately needs in order to be able to get within
Bink.
striking range of its targets. Its clumsy flight and slow ground movement speed
I didn't
makes
know they
chasing
flew.
prey basically impossible. However, what they lack in movement speed, they easily make up for with strike speed. The Mantis' strike is lightning quick, to the point that it's easily able to hit targets that are normally considered hopelessly evasive. As powerful as these strikes
Get
are,
them
one weakness
hands.
of the strategy is that the grappling attack doesn't immobilize the target, and actually brings them within range of a counterattack. And while
Yeah,
the
don't lick it
Mantis'
off.
large size enables it to tank most counterattacks, attacking a venomous target can end up being a serious blunder for a Mantis player. So definitely a powerful high-tier predator, but not one that's so invincible that Mantis mains can get careless.
Must break my wife's heart to
He's got
see
body.
the mess I've made of this family.
I don't
I
care.
sacrificed
I'm
you
not
to give
watching
us a
it.
home.
What's it? A Yellowstone shit?
Sacrifice is exactly
Who
what
watches
we're
this?
gonna do.
Yellowstone 2-hour
John
premiere
Dutton.
event tonight
Who
at
watches
8 on
this?
Paramount Network.
2-hour premiere.
Apartments.com makes searching so
What?
easy.
Oh.
Next in A tier, we have the flies. This does get a bit confusing due to the amount of other builds that use the word fly in their name. But this group, the true flies, are defined
Yuck.
by a very specific
You look
feature.
stupid as
True
hell.
flies only have 2 wings.
You
This
look
might
dumb.
seem like a major trade-off, but while it does leave them more vulnerable to having their flight ability disabled from taking damage, the perk they unlock in return is more than worth the risk. Instead of a second pair of wings, flies swap them out for halteres, a sensory structure that grants flies an insanely powerful buff to their aerial maneuverability and their evasion. Their
a
superior
big-ass fly.
aerobatics make them all but impossible to land a hit on midair, and also enables predator fly variants such as the robber fly to launch incredibly precise attacks mid-flight and take down targets that would normally be
weak
too
ass
powerful to
hit.
confront head-on, but are unable to effectively counterattack during flight. However, most flies are either scavengers or parasites,
Flies
using their
beating
quick
up bees.
mobility and superior reaction speed to weave past the defenses and avoid the sweeping counterattacks of larger players. While they do have an extremely short lifespan, there's no denying that they make the most of the time they do have, and are one of the most efficient and evasive builds in the entire game.
Bruh, stop showing these
But while
nasty ass
flies
frogs,
are excellent
please.
aerial combatants, they are no match for the ultimate aerial hunter build. The
Dragonfly.
Dragonfly is similar to the Crocodile in
Dragonflies
that
do.
it is one of the most well-optimized PvP builds that has ever existed
Every
in the
time I
game.
see, every time I
It's
see a
already such an
dragonfly,
efficient build that across
they don't do anything. They just like sit in my face, or like they just chill there.
several balance patches and game expansions, the Dragonfly has seen very few changes to its core strategy. They simply aren't necessary, as the Dragonfly is already equipped to deal with just about anything the devs throw at it. So what is it about the Dragonfly that has given it such a competitive edge? Dragonflies have the best aerial maneuverability of any build in the game, and the highest top flight speed of any insect. Unlike most insects, dragonflies have spec'd into the ability to move their wings independently of each other, which grants them the ability to move in any direction without
Man,
needing
leave the
to turn
ducks
and face
alone,
that
man.
direction, meaning they can strafe mid-flight and even fly backwards. This ability makes their flight more energetically demanding than it is for other insects. So this is a high commitment, high reward playstyle. In order to ensure a proper payoff for their incredible agility, dragonflies have also spec'd into what is arguably the best vision of any arthropod. Extremely large, high-resolution eyes that take up basically their entire head, granting them full 360-degree vision. This allows them to track all potential targets around them with ease, and allows them to see attacks coming long before they're actually at risk of getting hit. Unlike many of the other builds on this list, which either have a powerful larval form but a weak adult form, or a powerful adult form that can only achieve this after enduring an extremely vulnerable early game, the dragonfly is a high-tier predator in both forms. While everyone knows they dominate the skies when they reach their max level,
Excuse
what
me?
you might not know is that as nymphs, dragonflies are one of the most vicious aquatic builds in the game, able to one-shot similarly
Huh?
sized
I did
fish
not
and
know they
amphibian
were.
players. Now, while
Dragonflies
it's
are
tempting to
born
put
in
dragonflies
water.
in S tier, they do have a few shortcomings.
Yeah,
While
kill
they are
these
generally
chapos.
able to see approaching predators before it's too late, they aren't particularly good at avoiding accidentally flying into dangerous situations. They're easily trapped by spiderwebs and are often snatched out of the air when flying too
Damn.
close to another player. In addition, dragonflies cannot walk, meaning that their energy-expensive flight ability is their only option if they need to reposition
Golly,
themselves.
why you?
Not that devastating of a weakness,
No,
but it's
no
enough
way.
that this ancient build can't quite break into S tier. First in S tier, we have
Beetles.
the beetle. The beetle
I got
is
bit
the
by a
epitome
beetle
of
once.
the
This shit was
insect build.
painful.
A bunch of extraordinarily powerful abilities that seem like they shouldn't really function properly when used in conjunction
So
with each
fucking
other,
goofy.
yet somehow actually end up synergizing unbelievably well. Beetles are the premier tanks of the insect faction, with an outer cuticle sturdy enough to deflect just about any attack with ease. It has such a high AC that it can confidently plow through a swarm of aggressive ants without taking any damage, something that even many reptiles and amphibians can't get away with. Now, typically when a build is heavily
It was a
invested
beetle
into
like that
defenses
too.
like
It
this,
was just like
it
this.
has to make a lot of sacrifices in its other
I don't know if
stats.
it was this,
This
but
is the opposite of what we see in the beetle build, as in addition to being the most heavily armored insect in the game, it also excels in several other metrics. The most obvious of which is its power stat. Beetles can obliterate their enemies in combat using powerful jaws and explosive chemical weapons.
obliterate.
Their ability to bulldoze opponents with their forward-facing weaponry is hard to overstate. But in my opinion,
Damn.
their real damage potential comes from beetles which possess the ability to blast their attackers with a toxic or acidic chemical burst. But that's not where the craziness stops, because although you'd probably expect a high-power tank to be a slow, lumbering build, beetles also possess the top terrestrial movement speed of any insect. And if that weren't enough, despite
God
often
dang.
having heavy horns or giant mandibles, packing a tank full of noxious chemicals, being clad in heavy armor, and strapped with enough muscle to move objects far, far above their weight class, the beetle is still able to
Nasty.
fly without much issue.
Bro,
Now,
what's
they
better
did
than a beetle?
sacrifice one of their sets of wings for additional armor, so they can't perform the advanced aerobatics that dragonflies and houseflies can. But the ability to get from point A to point B via flight is still extremely valuable, both for escaping danger
What's better
and for
than this
reaching
beetle?
valuable points
Please
of
let me
interest.
know.
In short, beetles have essentially every ability they could ask for. They are an amalgamation of everything that makes the insect faction so powerful, and so it's no surprise that beetle species comprise a whopping 25% of all species in the game. They're so versatile and adaptable that a beetle player can find a niche in essentially any server. They truly are the ultimate insect and deserve a tier list of their own. As incredible as this combination of powerful abilities is, ultimately the beetle is still lacking the most powerful insect ability of them all, eusociality. Now, I have an entire video dedicated to explaining just how
What?
broken this ability is.
What the fuck is
and there's no question
eusociality?
that the insects that incorporate it into their game plan simply
Teaming
dominate
up?
all in their
Teamwork?
path.
We're not talking about teamwork. We're talking about
Technically,
one-on-one
termites
hands.
are a variant of the cockroach build, but they have such a unique and powerful playstyle that lumping them in with mid-tier cockroaches seems disingenuous. The termite queen is the longest-lived insect in the game, with a lifespan near that of a human or elephant, and it spends these many decades
Nasty-ass
building one of the
termite.
most powerful armies the game has ever seen. These termite armies are able to construct some of the most well-fortified bases in the game, giving even beaver dams and human skyscrapers a run for their money. Not only do they build incredible bases, but termites literally transform the map in order to better optimize their colony's ability to gather resources.
Termites build
They
that.
will pave paths and build ramps and bridges to important resource deposits. This efficiency
I
allows
thought they
them
was
to
just
support a
munchers.
huge army and command vast territories. Termites, despite
the
being
DK
most closely related to
soundtrack.
cockroaches, have a combat style that is actually most similar to the spitting cobra, which, if you've seen my snake tier list, you'd know is also a top tier build. Termites can accurately fire acid from a needle-like horn on their face, dealing heavy damage to anything caught in its blast. Some termites opt for giant slicing jaws instead of acid sprayers on their head, and are crucial for defending their base from an onslaught of invaders.
Chink, chink.
Termites are a somewhat imbalanced build, with crazy
Big ass
powerful
head.
forward-facing weaponry, but extremely vulnerable abdomens with no armor at all. This means that oftentimes, despite
Little bitty
a larger
body.
size, they are quickly overwhelmed if they get outnumbered and flanked. Not usually an issue, as termites are proficient at defending in a phalanx formation which covers the weak points of individual members. So certainly not a bad enough weakness to negate the top tier status of eusociality. But
Big
this weakness
head
does mean that
boy.
I gotta give the top spot to the other eusocial insect faction.
Can't be thinking with his noggin for real.
Shake that wig on, come on. You guys were so off beat. Okay, all right, let's eat.
One.
Hymenoptera is the group of insects that includes ants, bees, and wasps. Unlike termites,
Double
these
kill.
insects are a bit more well-rounded, having decent armor all over, and tend to have both forward and rear-facing weaponry, with most hymenopterans packing strong jaws and a venomous stinger. The wasp's signature buzz and yellow banding are so infamous that almost every other insect faction in the game has at least a few members trying to replicate it to gain advantage on their own intimidation checks. Eusocial hymenopterans can build extremely complicated structures without
So
the
y'all
use of
just grouped a
tools.
bunch of insects
They can
together.
launch organized attacks containing
Kinda
thousands of
cheating,
combatants.
but okay.
They can capture prisoners, cross major barriers, and control territory to an absolutely incredible degree. Thousands of players will lay down their lives in defense of a colony if need be. Ants in particular are masters of both empire building and military tactics, often having to wage war on multiple fronts while undertaking large construction and agricultural projects in their own territory. So, while beetles may take up a larger percentage of total insect variants,
Beetles.
termites and ants both vastly outnumber any other insect build. And while I don't base my tier lists purely off of population, there's no denying that the abundance of these insects is due to their incredibly powerful strategies and their ability to bend their environment to their advantage. In fact, the only genuine threats to eusocial players tend to be invaders disguising themselves as members of their own colony, but are really there to disrupt, steal, and attack. Many spider, hemiptera, and mantis mains adopt the strategy, and are incredibly successful in doing so. As the ant troops forage and browse unknown territory, the parasites weave their way into their ranks. Something similar happens when you browse the internet without using NordVPN.
All right, they not paying me. Oh dang, that's the end of the video. Wow. Okay. Well, ants and what you call it? Ants and bees and all that good stuff. Birds and bees. Number one, S tiers. Termites, big head, little bodies. Beetles, which I thought was overall the best one, but I guess not because they don't have a team. But yeah, I mean that was an insect tier list. You guys let me know if you enjoyed that. Like I said, original video will be linked down below in the description if you want to check that out without my reaction attached to it. Make sure you guys like, share, subscribe to the channel. Follow me on Twitch. Follow me on TikTok. Follow me on IG. I'm gonna try to start streaming on YouTube more, so be on the lookout for that. I think that's about it. Let me know your favorite insect. If you have a favorite insect, let me know if you mess with insects or not. And I'll see you guys next time. Appreciate you. Peace.